Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a very special guest joining us. His name is Alec John Belle. He's written a number of incredible books, ranging from fiction to poetry to all sorts of things. One of his most recent ones is called Every Shade of Me, which we'll talk a little bit about today. So, Alec, my friend, welcome to the podcast. I've been looking forward to connecting with you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Definitely. So before we get into your story, into your book, maybe take a few moments to tell us about Alec John Bell, especially for people who are not familiar, maybe with you and your work. Real quick, who are you? What do you do? Give us the general intro.
Who am I? That's such a that's
We
such a
could talk. We could talk all day about
that's
that, right?
I know that's such a big existential question.
Right.
I am a 26-year-old who is currently living in Massachusetts. I have two pets. I have a dog and a cat named Henry and Lizzie, and I am currently going to school for religious studies,
Hmm.
and I plan on double majoring in positive psychology as well.
Hmm.
But I have to do at least one full semester of their school before I can add a double major. So I'm in the middle of doing that. And yeah, I know they always say that, like, when people ask you who you are, you shouldn't say the things that you do because you aren't because you aren't what you do.
Right.
But I feel like what you do makes up so much of who you are. Like, to me, like, I'm a writer. Like, I write, and I love writing. I've loved writing since I was a kid, and I love just being able to express myself in that format, I guess,
Yeah.
and express myself creatively that way. And so when I think about who I am as a person, I think of myself as somebody who's creative, somebody who's ambitious, somebody who's driven, and somebody who strives to get what I want. And that's I don't know.
That's perfect. I mean, when I look at you online, like I scroll through your Facebook and I see all the stuff that you're creating and just all your writing, especially, like you said, everybody always says, don't talk about the things that you do because that's not really what you are, but it's true. I mean, you are a writer. That's something that comes from a very deep place. When someone asks me tell me about yourself, I'm like, well, like I'm a creator, I create podcasts, I create blogs, I create videos, I create different things. That's the essence of who we are. So I think that's a perfect description.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So you've released some new books lately, but one that seems particularly important to you in your journey, which was released a little bit ago, but it's still one of the more recent ones, is Every Shade of Me. This book for our listeners is a fiction book, and so obviously, Alec, I don't want you to give away any spoilers that is going to ruin the story for people. But can you talk to us a little bit about maybe what this book is about? Who you wrote this book for. Take us into the story a little bit, and we'll see where that leads us.
So I whoops. So, I was going through a very difficult time because I had just moved to Nevada at the time.
Hmm.
And I moved to Nevada because I was trying to get away from my family. And I was trying to kind of separate myself from them. And not because I didn't love them or because I
Hmm.
didn't care about them, but because I was like, I'm 18, I want to be on my own, I want to do this thing. So I moved to Nevada, and I felt very alone, and I felt very isolated.
Hmm.
And I had this incident where I started having online conversations with an older man on the internet. And he wasn't that much older than me. He was 11, 12 years older than me. I was 19 at the time. He was like 31.
Hmm.
So, yeah, like 12 years older than me. And at the time, I felt so ecstatic about it. I felt so important and I felt so valued. This person made me feel very good, made me feel like they wanted me to be a part of their life forever and
Mhm.
all this other stuff. And then things just changed pretty dramatically. And I won't say how because you'll have to read the book to find out. But things it definitely it was a very interesting it was a very interesting situation. And one of the things that was very important to me about writing Every Shade of Me was that I am an empath, and
Mhm.
so I feel things very deeply. And when I came up with the concept for the book, I was like, okay, I want this character to be an empath, but how do I make this a little bit more creative? How do I
Mhm.
make this a little bit more interesting? And so I decided that I wanted to have him see the world kind of in colors.
Mhm.
So he experiences these emotions that he feels from other people and from other situations, and he feels them and sees them in colors. And I thought that was just such an interesting way of expressing that. And I think a lot of that has to do with like my history with like chakra work and things like
Mhm.
that.
Mm.
And I really just wanted to I just wanted to tell a story about an empath who could find a way to connect with people and not feel so isolated.
Mm.
Because I know that for a long time for me, being an empath was very isolating.
Mm.
So that's kind of the general gist of the book.
I love that because I can tell I'm not a big fiction reader. Like I've read a few fiction books here and there, but you can always tell like when, for me anyway, I feel like you can always tell when someone's writing a really good story because they have a really good idea for a story and it's, got a lot of great angles, a lot of great perspectives, a lot of great, cliffhangers, things like that. And then you can also tell when somebody's writing a story, even if it's nonfiction, like you can tell if it's coming from a personal
Mhm.
place, and I could feel like this story of this guy Grayson, like I could feel like there's something personal going on in this story to Alec and your journey, and so it's interesting to hear how like your personal story bleeds through these pages and through these story and through these words in the story. So well done.
Thank you.
Can you talk more about like, because I have a couple friends who identify themselves as like an empath, and you said about how that was particularly like there was a moment or a time in your life where it felt very isolating. Like, can you talk maybe just for a minute about that experience for people who might not be familiar? First of all, I guess with the term empath, maybe take a little bit deeper into that and what you mean by being like isolated from people or feeling isolated.
So for me, an empath is basically somebody that feels other people's emotions very strongly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can walk into a room and I can just feel the energy in the room. I
Mm.
can feel the uncomfortability or the
Like a weight or a
yeah, it's like there's just something about it, and I can feel when people are angry at me. I can feel when people are upset. I can feel when people are happy. I can feel when people are like they don't even have to say anything. I can
mm,
just be in the same room as them and I know, and I might not know the exact situation, but I do know. So for me, being an empath is essentially just somebody who is able to empathize, but kind of on an extra level. Because I
yeah.
think everybody has the ability to empathize,
Mhm.
but I personally, in my opinion, don't believe that everybody is an empath
Sure.
because I think that there is a difference between having empathy for people and extending empathy toward people, but then there's people like me who are empaths, and we just feel things so strongly everywhere we go.
Yep.
And like there was a time where just leaving my house was difficult. It was so hard.
Mm.
And I just I'm so happy that I'm in a better place now where I'm able to to do that and leave my house and go out and hang out with people and go out and go to places like the mall or
Mhm.
things like that without feeling so overwhelmed.
Yeah. I had a friend who kind of explained some of the same things that you just did, and he said that it's almost like I feel like stuck sometimes because it's like I have to process my own feelings and my own emotions, but I'm also trying to process other people's feelings and emotions because I feel them at such a deep level. And so sometimes it can become almost like this entangled spider web inside of your feelings, his feelings, her feelings, my feelings, and trying to untangle all those things. And that can bring you into almost like an isolated place, not so much because you want to withdraw, but because your mind is so overwhelmed and exploding with all these different things that you have no choice but to kind of withdraw to process all those different things. So,
Yeah, I think that's the difficult thing about being an empath is that you don't know sometimes what your feelings are and what
yeah.
other people's feelings are because I'm the type of person that doesn't get angry. I don't get angry very often.
Mhm.
But if I'm around somebody who's angry, I get angry.
Mm,
And that's when I know that I'm feeling something that somebody else is feeling because I know
yeah.
that that's not an emotion that I typically feel on a regular basis.
Yeah. That's helpful. Helpful. Thank you for explaining all that. Can
Yeah.
you talk to us a little bit about your spiritual journey? It's something I'm interested in hearing about because I've seen some of your different posts and stuff on Facebook. But can you talk a bit about like your personal, I don't know, like your personal spirituality, like your journey with God, the divine, Jesus, whatever kind of word we want to use, or the church. Like, what is your spiritual upbringing? What was that like? Where are you now? And like, how did you get from A to B? What was that journey like? Some of the ups and,
Yeah.
and the downs. Like,
I
I know
will
you're
give
currently in the tarot. I mean, you have a tarot. You have
Yes,
the death card shirt on.
I'm currently wearing my death card shirt
Love
because
it.
the death card is my favorite card in tarot, but no, I'll give you the very shortened version of this
Hmm.
story. So I was in a hospital in 20 I don't know what year it was. I was 19
Hmm.
and I was in a hospital. And I a lot of people are gonna think I'm a little woo for saying this, but I had spent many years I always believed in God, but I was very angry at God
Mm,
because I came out as gay when I was very young, and that was that put a very big strain on my relationship with God
mm,
because of the way my family reacted.
mm,
So when I was 19, I was in a hospital and we were having this spirituality group where like everybody was talking about how they felt like God hated them and how they felt like and we were all crying. We were all crying together and whatever. And I am not even kidding you. I heard this audible voice say, "I still love you."
mm,
And I was like, "What?"
mm.
I
Come
like, I was
again.
like, I thought for a second, like, that I, like, misunderstood something, and then I heard it again, and I heard it say even stronger the second time, "I still love you."
Mm,
So, I was like, "Okay, that's really weird."
mm,
I was like, "That's really bizarre." So, of course, I called my grandma, because my grandma is very, very Christian, and I was
mm,
like, "Okay, what's going on?" And she was like, "I knew this was gonna happen." She was like, "I didn't wanna tell you because I didn't wanna freak you out," but she was like, "I knew something was gonna happen while you were in there." So that kind of led me back to the path of Christianity. I started getting really into crystals, I ended up really getting into tarot and oracle cards. And then I ended up getting really interested in witchcraft. And so
mm,
I started identifying as a Christian witch,
mm.
which of
I'm sure
course,
that didn't cause any problems with
yeah, oh
anybody.
yeah, that caused no problems.
Easy.
Everybody was fine with that. But, and then I I went from that to being a Christian Buddhist witch because I was like, "Okay, I love Buddhism too." And then I kinda just kept adding on things to the list
Mm,
to the point where I was like, "Okay, this list is just getting too long." I was like, "I
mm,
need something that, like, encompasses everything that I believe in." And that's when I found omnism, and I believe I'm saying that right, but and for those who don't know, that's omnism is basically the idea that you believe that there's truth in all religions, but that no religion holds all truth.
mhm.
And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So you can take things from here, there, everywhere, and
Yeah.
nobody holds the corner market,
Yeah.
but everybody's got something to say.
Yeah.
Now, when you say before you talked about going like identifying as a Christian witch. I think that's a very interesting term that carries an immense amount of baggage for people who grew up in the church because we all heard about witches and how evil they were and all the different things. Can you just briefly share like in your experience and your understanding and your identification as that like what did that mean for you, like what is a witch? Because a witch is not somebody who rides a broomstick and wears a big
No.
pointed hat and casts all these crazy horrible evil spells on people, but a witch is something very different, so maybe just give us some clarity on that.
Yeah, a Christian, for me, being a Christian witch meant that I was a follower of Jesus, which this'll lead into probably the thing that we're gonna talk about later,
Mhm.
um, but I still was a follower of Jesus, but that was I was no longer really following that I was no longer abiding by the rules. And when found I found witchcraft, I I felt it felt like home to me.
Mm.
But Christianity also felt like home to me. And both of those things still feel like home to me.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that it's like that picture that I've seen it's like that picture I've seen floating around on the internet. I think it's by Naked Pastor, the one that says, I I Christianity is my home, but I have cottages everywhere.
Yeah.
That's kind of it's kind of how I feel.
Yeah.
And so witchcraft for me, being a witch, wasn't about casting spells to like harm people or to hurt people or to do anything. It's basically just doing putting my energy out into the universe by utilizing herbs, candles,
Mm.
oils, crystals, things like that, and just using these things to kind of put I, my desires out into the universe.
I think it's important for people to hear because, again, I mean, I know there's a lot of people, at least I've been encountering more and more people who would identify themselves as a witch, even if they don't say that to
Hmm.
people because they're afraid of the reaction they're going to get because of the baggage that term carries. And from what I've understood, and you just explained it very well, is that people who see themselves as a witch are very almost like very pagan in nature in the sense that they're very in tune with the earth, very in tune with the elements of the universe, and really see like the power in those things and almost see the interconnectedness of all of those things as well. And I think that word gets a very unfair hit, especially in the church world, because like, you have there's that pastor, I forget his name, but I think he's in Texas, and they just had, like, this big book burning thing out in the parking lot, and he, like, insists, like, there's witches who are in our congregation. I know who you are. I've seen you post things on Facebook. But, like, doing a little bit of digging, like, the things those people were apparently posting were just very, pagan in nature in the sense that they're very connected to the earth and things like that. But, like, I just think that word just becomes such a fear-filled word, and I think it's important for us to talk about it so that people don't feel so uncomfortable when they encounter someone like yourself whom identify in that way, and we can make that person feel welcome in our presence.
I remember when I first brought up to my mother that I was a Christian witch, and it was so funny because my parents have come a very long way. My dad's an atheist now, and
Mm,
my my mom, she I don't know. I don't really know what she believes anymore, but they're okay with me being gay.
mhm.
And so when I went to her and I was like, "Hey mom, I'm a Christian witch." She kind of was like she seemed to think about it for a second, and then she was like, that term witch carries a lot of weight."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I know it
Mhm.
does."
Yeah.
I know, it does. Unfortunately, it does, but yeah.
Alright, so you said that and you said this on Facebook as well, that you still you don't consider yourself to be a Christian,
Mhm.
but you consider yourself to be a follower of the way of Jesus. And you said before about, you don't follow the rules, so to speak. And I think a lot of those rules are more man-made rules that come from, very, very long history. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Like these days, like if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, the way of Jesus, like what does Jesus mean for you? What are the maybe more complicated things like the cross? Because that's obviously part of Jesus' story. Does that have any relevance for you in your life? Like, what do you and Jesus look like these days?
Yeah. So, for me, my biggest thing was that I never wanted to give up my relationship with Jesus.
Mm,
When I was going through my deconstruction process, I told myself, I said, I do not want to give up my relationship with Jesus, especially once I had read the entire New Testament of the Bible, which I have, and I've read about half of the Old Testament of the Bible.
mm,
And I said to myself, I don't want to give up this personal relationship that I have with this spiritual being that I know exists
mm,
because I've had experiences with him and I've had personal encounters with him.
mm,
For me, the 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 problem with the term Christian, or at least the problem that I have with the term Christian, is that it's almost become like a dirty word
mhm.
these days. And
Talk about baggage, right?
yeah, no, seriously, when I think of Christians, like I think of people who are homophobic,
Mhm,
transphobic, racist, sexist, misogynistic, um the list goes on, and it it's hard for me to believe that it's like when I read the New Testament of the Bible, and I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I read all about Jesus, I was shocked at some of the things that I read, because I grew up believing that Jesus was like this, that Jesus was going to come back and like descend from the sky and like, slaughter all the
On his
sinners,
horse and his sword, yeah.
yeah, like in the end times, and
Right.
like the thing is though is that and he did get angry from time to time, but like, it's like I feel like when I read the New Testament of the Bible, I felt like I was reading a different version of the Bible than other Christians were reading.
Mm,
And I felt like there was a big disconnect from what I was understanding and what other people were understanding. I didn't want to just like push Jesus away and say, "Oh no, I'm done with him,"
mhm,
because he's not the problem.
right.
He's not the issue here. The issue is the people that I personally believe are misinterpreting the things that he said, or just completely ignoring some of the things that he said.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't remember exactly what verse it is. I have it saved in my phone somewhere, which I wouldn't even be able to dig out right now if I even wanted to, because there's so many notes in my phone. But it was it was like somewhere in one of the gospels he's where he's talking about how like upset and angry he is at at the religious people at the time. And I'm like, "Are people not getting it?"
Right.
Like, is
He's
nobody
yelling at the religious ones,
understanding?
right?
It's like, I feel like nobody's understanding it. He didn't want this to become a religion. He didn't want this.
Yeah,
That's not what he wanted.
yeah,
And that's why I consider myself a Jesus follower and not a Christian,
mm.
because I don't think that Christianity is what Jesus's goal was.
I think it was Rob Bell. He said in his there's a documentary that somebody put together about him, called The Heretic, and there's one line in there where he says, I think he says Jesus, like the Bible, it's all been like hijacked,
Mhm,
by all these different groups and systems and political agendas. And like you said, like when people think of that word Christian, they think of what's associated with North American evangelicalism, and that becomes what Christianity is. And I think for me, like I was ready to give up on the term Christian for a long time, especially after starting the podcast, because I was like, there's just so much wrapped up in that term that just makes me feel sick. But then I came across like Bart Ehrman's work, and he wrote a book called Lost Christianities, and
mhm.
talks about the history of Christianity, how wide and how diverse it is. I was like, oh, so like this narrow stream of far right evangelicalism that I've been given growing up is just a very small stream. Whereas I was told this is what was handed down from Jesus to the apostles to everybody today. This is the way that it is. I'm like, no, now I realize it's so wide and diverse. There's so many different ways that people have thought about Jesus and the cross. And that just made me feel all the more at home, I think, in that term, because now I can pull from these other streams that are very real streams, and I can make a more personalized faith for myself.
Yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to say too, that I forgot to mention, was about the cross, which is that, um, I'm sure you know Katie Valentine, right?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, so she I did one of her courses, and we were talking one day in one of our Zoom sessions that we were having as a group, and one of the girls was like, I believe in Jesus, and I believe in his death and his death meaning something, but I don't know what I believe in his death meaning
Mm.
exactly. And Katie put it a lot more eloquently than I'm about to put it right now. But basically, Katie said something along the lines of like Jesus died as a symbol of non-violence.
Mm.
Like he died as a way to represent like what should not happen.
Yeah.
And when I kind of look at it from that perspective, instead of like the atonement theories that, are floating around, that like he died for our sins and rose from the dead and,
Mm.
came back after 3 days and then like floated up into heaven. Like, I don't know. It's like to me, like it makes more sense that there would be a more symbolic kind of thing surrounding his death. But again, I am not a theologian, so don't listen to me if I am not speaking from from the right place, then I definitely apologize. But yeah, no, I definitely, that's kind of how I view
Yeah, I
that.
mean, I think, I think symbolism for me nowadays has a lot more of a place in my faith than it used to because, growing up in for what I did, everything in the Bible is literal. This is a historical document. It's even in some senses it's like scientific in the way that it describes the universe. And so that was just the world I came from. But now, like I'm seeing that I think a lot of these stories, you know, some of the people might have existed. Jesus existed, maybe Paul obviously existed. Like these different characters may have existed, but maybe the stories that are surrounding them were told in such a way to bring about different points that are common in our humanity. And I have a 6-year-old daughter. She's starting to ask a lot of questions now about a lot of different things. And the other night we were laying in bed and I was putting her to bed, and she said, so well, is the story of Jesus, like, is it real? And I was like, uh-oh. So what do you mean is it real? Like, take that apart for me. So she said, well, like, did Jesus really come back to life? Because if Jesus really came back to life, like, why didn't grandpa come back to life? Her grandpa just passed away last
Uh,
year. And why didn't Snuffy, our dog, come back to life? Like, why would God just bring Jesus back to life and not these people that I love? And so I said, well, what do you think about the story? Do you think it's real? Or do you think it's like, what do you think? And she said, well, I don't know. Like, it's in the Bible, so like it must be real, right? I think that some stories can be true, even if they didn't really happen in the way that it says that it happened. It's like,
mhm,
well, what do you mean? I think the story of Jesus, I said, for me, is, God created everybody, and God created everybody to be just like God, loving, kind, generous, helpful, all those different things. I said, but at some point along the way, I said, I think we all kind of forget who we are. We all have our moments where we don't treat people very kindly, we treat people very poorly, we do things that maybe aren't very God-like. And I said, I think that, God, it lives inside of all of us, but lived inside of Jesus in this special way where when we look at Jesus, we remember who we really are, who we're supposed to be like. Jesus is almost like God's mirror to us to say, look, this is who you really are. And we can remember that. And I said, I think when, a lot of people like that, they followed him. They were called his disciples. Some people didn't like it and they decided they were going to get rid of him. And so they put him on the cross. I said, but his last words on the cross were, I love you and I forgive you. I said, did that really happen? I don't know. I said, but that's what the story says. And I said, then he came back to life, 3 days later. And I said, I think the point is that there's a lot of power in love. There's a lot of power in forgiveness. And that love and that forgiveness can bring new life into situations in our lives that feel like they're dead. I said, so for me, it's a very true story even if it didn't happen. Did it really happen that way? I don't really know. And she was like, "Oh," so she's like, "So these stories in the Bible can be true even if they didn't really happen." I said, "Exactly." And so that's how we left the conversation. So we'll see where it picks up next time. But for me, that's kind of what Jesus means for me these days. Like, did these stories really happen? Whether it says, I don't really know, but I think it's the symbolism in the story that speaks to our humanity. That's the most important thing.
That is such a beautiful way of putting it. I just
Mhm.
have to say that. Like I really resonate with that because it's really like it's really like hard to kind of understand, like, did these events really happen the way that were led to believe they did? I don't know. I have no
Yeah.
idea. I wasn't there.
Right.
I I don't know. I think a lot of I personally, in my own opinion, believe that a lot of the Jesus story is allegorical,
Mhm.
and I think that there's a lot of symbolism and a lot of like I don't think well, I don't think when a lot of these stories were written that they were meant to be taken so literally.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like when I write my books. Like, am I when like my books, like all of my books have been inspired
Mhm.
by God, but does that make them true? It's kind of like Every Shade of Me,
Right.
my book.
Yeah.
It's like, did the events of that book happen? Some of them did.
Yep.
Did all of them happen? No.
Yep.
Did does that mean that it's not true? No.
No.
But yeah.
I think I mean, you gotta think too, like these writers, I think we lose track of this because we live in a Western world. We have this very analytical, intellectual approach to everything. And we have to realize that the people who lived in these cultures who are writing these stories didn't really care about the same things that we care about. Like they weren't out to write a history book. They weren't out to record all of these stories necessarily. Like a Jesus cam following him around, recording every single detail, as much as they were like these writers were writing, especially the gospels were written to specific communities. And
Mhm,
I think Bart Ehrman talks about how, Mark wrote differently than Matthew, or Matthew wrote differently than Mark because Matthew was writing to different people than Mark was. Matthew
mhm.
didn't really care what Mark had to say. It was more about what his people, what his readers or whatever needed to hear. I think that's
Yeah.
an important approach to think to realize when we're reading the Gospels because if you really read them as you have, there's differences. I mean, you can't miss the differences in the stories, but those differences are calculated and those differences are on purpose, and those differences are there to make a specific point to the audience. And I think that when we take that approach to reading the scriptures, it can open up just a whole nother world of opportunity for us to dive into.
Yeah.
That's been my experience anyway. Well, hey, we're just about nearing the end of our time. I was going to ask you about the Bible, but we kind of touched on that already. But real quick, where can people go to interact with you online? Is there any website that you have? Any kind of
So I do not have a website, but
mhm,
people can find me on Facebook
mhm,
at Alec John Bell. I have a professional, like, public profile,
mhm.
and then I have a private, I will say private in quotes because all my posts are public.
Sure.
So it's not really private anymore. I post there the most often, but I also do have a TikTok, and my TikTok is also just Alec John Bell.
Awesome. Well, I'll put the links in the show notes and we'll do this again sometime.
Okay, awesome. Thank
Cool.
you so much.